For generations, women in Nepal and across the world have been systemically marginalized, often excluded from political decision-making and economic participation. Although significant progress has been made in recent years toward greater inclusion, questions remain. Is this inclusion meaningful, or is it merely symbolic? Nepal's path to achieving gender equality, as outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals, is complex. The country's vast cultural and geographic diversity means that gender inequality looks different in the Tarai than it does in the hills or the high mountains. Layered over these long-standing social and structural inequalities is the growing threat of climate change, a crisis that is not only environmental but deeply gendered. As climate impacts intensify, there is growing concern that gains made in women's rights and leadership are beginning to erode. To explore these issues and to understand what an inclusive, climate-resilient future for Nepali women could look like, we are joined by Patricia Fernandez Pacheco, country representative for UN Women, Nepal. Welcome to Kantipur News Talk.
Thank you, Sarah.
How are you doing today?
Very good. Very happy to be here.
Great. I just want to begin with one of the things that you said during a recent program called Nirvik Nari. You mentioned about sticky floors, you mentioned about broken ladders, and then the glass ceiling. It spoke volume about all the visible and invisible challenges and barriers that women across all sectors, age and communities and backgrounds have to face. It hit hard.
Okay. No, that's excellent, because indeed I feel it's a very powerful metaphor. Oftentimes we have talked about the glass ceiling, no? And I think that is something that we have discussed. In fact, there was a panel talking about this. But in general, when we talk about women, we tend to put them all together in one very homogeneous group, and then design policies that are also quite standardized. While the reality of women is very different, as you have just mentioned, no? The intersectionality plays a very important role. So this concept of the sticky floors and the broken ladders acknowledge that not every women have the same opportunities, that many women are in these sticky floors. That means that they can hardly lift off the ground because of many reasons. Some of them are linked to these harmful social practices like child marriage, no? Like the amount of domestic work that they do, unpaid work, or their and then having to leave the school because of that. So really not having the very basic opportunities, early pregnancies that would allow them to lift off the ground, no? So those sticky floors. But then this other scenario of the broken ladders is for those women and girls that are able to, start, for instance, livelihood or minimum education and be there. But because of the high level of informality where women are, because of climate change and disasters, their likelihood of falling, their very vulnerable, fragile situation and the lack of social protection is there. And then the very well-known glass ceiling, that no matter how much you study, how many opportunities you think you have, there's always these invisible barriers that wouldn't allow women to make the full contribution that they can make to the society and to the economy.
So climate crisis is one of the greatest challenges of our time at present. What are the key focus areas that UN Women are engaged in at the moment in Nepal?
So UN Women, as the entity that works on gender equality and women's empowerment, we work in the full scope of empowerment of women and girls. This means that there are angles to it that are economic empowerment. There's also the political empowerment, whether it's in public positions or like an active citizens. And we understand that everything is underpinned by these social norms that we mentioned, these mindsets that oftentimes, despite very sometimes progressive legislation like the case of Nepal, these social norms are the ones that are holding women back. So we work in this very comprehensive approach to empowerment, but we realize that climate change and disaster risk reduction is also part of the environment in which we operate. Just to give you an example, whenever we work with women trying to promote their economic activities and livelihood opportunities or employability, again, the changing patterns that climate change are bringing to the agriculture, or For instance, the fact that women, when hit by disaster, female-headed households are twice as likely to remain in prolonged displacement than men. So their vulnerability, but at the same time their presence in the agriculture, is something that you have to embed in everything that you do when you're talking about economic empowerment. And same for political participation. At the end of the day, political participation is having a voice in the public policies, in the decisions that will impact your life. And the absence of women in most decision-making bodies, whether it is local, national, or in international conferences, is also very obvious. So this is where we see that we need to make sure that climate change, disaster risk reduction, it's something that we consider in everything that we do when we talk about empowerment.
Just to continue on what you mentioned, we have powerful legislation, as you said. There are also issues or concerns that it's just token participation often. How do we go about dealing with it? How do we intervene?
Of course, there is what we've seen is like there's an element of quantitative participation and qualitative participation. This is what we call meaningful participation. Quantitative participation is a very important first step, and this is where the quota system has proven, not only in Nepal, but every country around the world, to be a temporary measure that is the most effective one in really advancing the presence of women in decision-making bodies, as I said, at every level. However, once you're there, you have to be able to meaningfully participate. And at the same time, it's expected that also the presence of women will bring more gender-responsive policies, decisions, no? And it's not a given. In fact, there are many challenges for this to materialize. So this is definitely a very important part of the agenda, that women are not just a token, but have the enabling environment to really be able to participate. And what we see is when they participate, they can really make the difference, no? We saw it during COVID-19, how when women were in the decision-making, because of their understanding of care, the policies, the responses were super effective.
At the recently concluded Sagarmatha Samvad, Nepal talked about climate accountability. UN Women at one of the panel discussions also emphasized on feminist climate justice. What do you mean by it?
Well, feminist climate justice basically demands that no climate justice is possible without gender justice. And we believe that there are these structural discrimination. As we say, it never rains but it pours, no? It's like there is this like structural discrimination that I described before, whether economic, political, underpinned by all these social norms. So if the commitment of Nepal is towards climate justice, you have to address the issue of gender justice. Now, gender justice implies, and is linked to your previous question, that you look at women from two angles. One of them is acknowledging their vulnerability, the disproportionate impact that every phenomenon negative has on women, whether it's extreme poverty, their likelihood of falling into extreme poverty because of disasters. What we see, for instance, in terms of the rise of trafficking in persons, in women and children, when a disaster strikes, can spike up to 20% more, 30% more. There are studies, for instance, that now show also the connection between drought and child marriage. So again, all these harmful social practices. The amount of drudgery that increases when resources become more scarce, because women are usually the ones that are in charge of fetching the water, the firewood, etc. So recognizing all this vulnerability and this disproportionate negative impact. But equally important, recognizing their contribution, their talent, their role, their capacity to be there, their presence in the agriculture. Right now, they're 70% of the agricultural workforce in Nepal, so just their presence. The contribution that they make through this drudgery, this unpaid care work, they do 85% of the unpaid care work or the care work in this country. This is equivalent of 17% of the GDP of Nepal. This is more than the whole industrial sector. So they're making an economic contribution, plus all the knowledge that they have. We see women's organizations, being the ones that are the first responders in a crisis, or in the case of indigenous women, those that bring all this like traditional knowledge. They know crop diversity, water management, conservation. So acknowledging those two things is the basis for this notion of feminist climate justice. Recognizing that through data, redistributing as much as possible the assets and the power that is in there, because when we talk about gender equality, we're always are talking about a power share, no? So who holds the land, who holds the resources, who holds the seats, no? Who makes the decisions? And in a way, redistributing that, making sure that the representation is there, the seats at the table, and the issue of recovering, and I think this is the reparations, the loss and damage discussion that also in Sagarmatha Samvad was really exciting. So it's a whole framework that tries to shape how we think about climate justice, and I'm excited to see that Nepal is very much thinking along those lines.
One of the things I drew from that is women are disproportionately impacted by climate crisis, but we often tend to just look at them as victims of what's happening, but they are also holding the potential to become change agents.
Absolutely.
How do we make the transition? You did mention about bringing more women in the table in decision-making roles. How long do you think it's going to take? It's a struggle, right? To make that change?
It is a struggle. It is a struggle, but it is about providing the enabling environment. I see all the time in everything that we do, you know, like women that are entrepreneurs, no, that sometimes come to entrepreneurship out of necessity, no, because many of their partners have migrated and now they're heading their household, and it's not like naturally there was in there, but they have this idea, no, and then they connect to others and they start. But the enabling environment oftentimes are not there, no, because of formal norms sometimes, and sometimes these unwritten norms, no, of like the reaction also sometimes of their own families, no, the support of the community, how women are perceived. So trusting in their capacities, no, seeing what they're capable of, and then building an enabling environment where, as I said, the resources are redistributed so that land is there, access to technology, access to financing, access to skills, and everything in a collective manner, for me, is the key to success, no? When women leave this isolation and this individual struggle and they join something that is collective, then we can really make a difference. I believe what I was mentioning in terms of recognizing the role in all these different areas is extremely important. This is why we've been, for instance, investing a lot in evidence building, no, and like showing the contribution of women in for instance, indigenous women, no, the knowledge that they bring, no, or the returning investment that comes when you invest in what we call climate smart technologies, and how by reducing this drudgery, you know, women have the time to actually be part of the reconstruction of their communities or in the actual discussion. But it's true that we don't see that right now the financing flows are matching this reality, no, of the capacity that is there. And again, affirmative action is the thing that works, and we've seen it, I said it also in Sagarmatha Samvad, in the UN we've seen it not only for climate funding fund, but also in general for development funds, for in the area of peace and security. We've seen that if you really want to boost a line of work, you have to invest in it. So this is why we support, for instance, creating special funding windows for grassroots organizations, no, women's organizations, those that when organized that can come together, but they need a special, sometimes it's called window, no, like funding window, and where they can apply and receive the funding. And it's just matching your aspiration with your financial commitment, no. There are many development partners that right now understood that, you know, if they are committed to gender equality, there's no reason why 2% of your funding, no, in this case the climate funding, should go to gender equality or to women-led initiatives. In the UN, we started with 15%. Now it has raised to 30% for many of these multi-donor funds. And now we've seen a very positive trends of many, like European Union, UK, Australia, saying no, 80%. There's no reason why an intervention should be gender blind, what we call gender blind, you know, like if we understand this potential. So that's an entry point, and we hope to see also positive progress in that direction, on targeting and giving opportunity to these groups that have so much to contribute to.
One of the programs that UN Women is supporting is called the Climate Smart Villages. What does a Climate Smart Village look like, and what do you think of the potential of replicating such practices, the sustainability of it?
Well, sometimes you need to start small to be able to showcase what would be possible, you know, at the national level and beyond. And the Climate Smart Villages is just a way to show how when you work with both what we call, from a human rights perspective, duty bearers, the decision makers, and the right holders, can really make a difference. So it's about working with those who are making the decisions at the local level, helping them develop action plans that are gender responsive, so we call them JET-C plans. That includes also the angle of disability, because the impact also of climate change and disasters in people living with disabilities is yet another layer of intersectionality. So making sure that those plans are there, that those plans are budgeted. I think that's the most important thing and Nepal is very advanced on understanding that gender responsive budgeting is what allows you to move from very good ideas and policies and frameworks to reality, real results for people. No, there's experience, and I think also parliamentarians understand the power of budgets. So this is at the local level, how you have plans with budgets that will allow you to respond to disasters and support climate action in a very gender responsive manner, but at the same time to build this awareness, this capacity of women. Oftentimes they don't see themselves as environmental defenders or community leaders. No, it's slowly, no, because women have been for such a long time in the private space, no, but doing so much, no, with such an understanding of many things, like of management, you know, in agriculture, etc. So having them join these groups and then become these actors that demand accountability, no, but in a very virtuous cycle, no, I think that's the key. And they're bringing all these elements around climate smart practices, no, agricultural practices, technologies, but technologies that are durable, that are sustainable.
Organic to the place as well.
Exactly. So we hope that this, you know, it's inspirational, let's say. It's very small scale, but UN usually invest in models that can be seen and then taken up and replicated and hopefully impact many, many people.
So women have contributed a lot in running the household, but their contribution has also not been acknowledged as much, especially when we account for the women's participation in the formal economy.
Well, this is one of my favorite subjects. It's called the care economy, and it's, yes, indeed, recognizing that women have historically subsidized economies because of this unpaid care work that is so fundamental for anything that we do. No, the reason why you and I are here is most likely because someone is taking care of us. So the right to care, right to be taken care of, it's fundamental for every human being and for societies, and how this is taken for granted, no, oftentimes unpaid or underpaid. It's a major challenge, but it's also one of these game changers. I truly believe that it's an accelerator for economic growth and for the progress of any society. So the work here has been mostly to start recognizing, as I said before, the economic value of this work that is being done. I mentioned before, it's 17% of the GDP in Nepal. But also to redistribute and reduce. And this is where climate smart technologies are extremely important, because the moment you reduce the time that you're using for this care work or drudgery in this case, and through technology, you liberate, like you free time that you can use to educate yourself, to participate, to rest, because we also say like, the time that women need, because it's 24 hours, to participate politically is extremely important. But it goes with also a cultural shift, where we need to see in the households, how this work is redistributed within the family, and how prestigious can be, active fatherhood, when we see fathers that get involved in also care work, how also satisfying, how positive it is for the families. But we need to see at the same time, not only in the household, the state, through public policies, private sector, no? I'm seeing more and more private sector that understand this, no? And that take care as part of their responsibilities, because they believe when they invest in well-being of their personnel, you know, they benefit from that, no? And that well-being is when they are able to balance, no, their family and their work. So this agenda has a lot of potential and is critical also for anything that we do on climate justice, I believe.
When we talk about equality, we can definitely not factor out the role that men play. When you mentioned about fatherhood as well, but how challenging or easy is it to, you know, engage with men in the campaign, in the all the issue that we are advocating for?
Well, any transformation in mindsets is very challenging, no? And oftentimes we see it happens only when a new generation comes and starts challenging, no? So in my experience, oftentimes many men say like, well, you know, I have a daughter and, you know, I want this too, you know, I imagine this, and I want them to have these opportunities, no? So they understand it, because of course, when you are raised in a certain, you know, culture, oftentimes you don't challenge, and because challenging is also requires a lot of courage, no? So that intergenerational dialogue, I think, is extremely powerful and disruptive, and that kind of dinner conversations, I believe, is where a lot of the change happens. I think the other key is that you approach it in, as I said before, in a very positive angle, no? It's not about, you know, like making anyone feel guilty or anything. It's about really understanding what is the potential benefit for families, for a society, for a community, and individually. And we know for sure through our work that when, as I said before, when men engage in active fatherhood, in you know, like taking their part in the household, they not only contribute to their partners, you know, being able to thrive, but also they benefit enormously, you know, like, and they benefit the family as such, no? So what we call positive masculinities, I think, is a trend that in many countries is there to stay, and I hope, yeah, we can see also a lot of progress in Nepal in the next few years.
As we look ahead, what gives you hope about the role of women and girls in shaping a more resilient and climate-just future for Nepal?
Well, first of all, in Sagarmatha Samvad, we were able to see a first announcement of NDC3, you know, the national determined contributions by Nepal. So, and I've mentioned to you some of these experiences that we see at the local level. So I feel overall there's a growing understanding that gender is a precondition, that gender equality and women's empowerment is a precondition, a key for success in whatever we want to do in climate justice. So that gives me hope, you know, the fact that, okay, it seems like it's slowly this mainstreaming, but then you see the frameworks that are capturing that dimension. And then on a daily basis, when I travel, when I meet women's organizations, we do a lot of, you know, the role of UN Women is oftentimes as a bridge builder, no, to bring women's organizations, bring them at the table, make sure that this conversation is happening, no. And I see that in all this interaction, they are the architects of resilience, no? Like when given the opportunity, they thrive, no? And they come up with always these excellent ideas, proposals, and you see it, no? Oftentimes with very scarce resources, no? But how much they're able to do. And again, youth, and I think young women give me a lot of hope. I think we saw a few years ago Greta Thunberg, no, like this voice of younger women claiming that they're not just the leaders of the future, they're the leaders of today, no? It's also their planet, no? And how their creativity also can play a very important role. So we invest very much on all of this, on creating those spaces for that creativity, for that talent to flourish, and that gives me hope and keeps me going every day.
We can only work harder and be hopeful.
Yes.
Patricia Fernandez Pacheco, thank you so much for your time in Kantipur News Talk.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure.
This conversation has reminded us that gender equality is not a single issue struggle. It's woven through every layer of our society, from political representation to economic access, and now more urgently than ever to climate resilience. While Nepal has made strides, real transformation requires that women, especially those from the most marginalized communities, are not only included but genuinely empowered to lead. As we face intersecting crises of inequality and environmental instability, the work ahead is both urgent and complex. But as we've heard today, it's also full of potential if we are willing to listen, to act, and to center justice in every policy and every program. Thank you for staying with us. Until next time.